All empires faced their inevitable decline. The Eastern Roman Empire was no exception to this. On the contrary, its exceptionalism lies in the amount of times the empire came close to the brink of destruction and managed to bounce back, scarred but still alive. The resurgences under Heraclius, the Macedonians, the Komnenians and the Laskarids are prime examples of this trend. Still, the situation of the empire in the 15th century seemed bleaker than ever. The Ottoman Turks had inundated the European domains of the empire, and Constantinople, in many regards, had been a city under siege for 70 years before its eventual fall. Despite the hopelessness of the situation, however, its eventual last emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, would mount on a series of heroical expeditions that culminated in his last stand in Constantinople, harnessing the remaining imperial resources to ensure that the Romans don't go down without a last fight, or even in an attempt to save the empire, if not in physical form, at least as an idea for the generations that followed. In this video, we'll be tracking his campaigns and policies from up close, as well as discussing the people and events that acted as his inspiration in this attempt. After the civil war of 1341 to 1347 and the subsequent Black Death, the Eastern Roman Empire stopped resembling a functional state. Serbian advances in the Balkans and Ottoman conquest in Asia Minor reduced Constantinople to the status of a minor power. It wasn't long until the Ottomans would advance in the Balkans, taking advantage of the weakness of the Balkan powers. By the year 1402, Constantinople was already a city under siege for 8 years. With the Emperor Manuel II Palaiologos being on an expedition around Europe, essentially begging for military help against the Ottomans. Thankfully for the surrounded empire, the decisive battle on Agira led to a Timurid victory over the Ottomans, which greatly weakened the latter, since a civil war would now ensue within the Ottoman state between the sons of the slain Sultan Bayezid. The Romans capitalized on this turn of events, with Manuel quickly returning back from his voyage and signing an alliance with the throne's contender residing on the European side of the Ottoman domains, Süleyman Çelebi. As part of this deal, the Romans would also be gaining Thessalonica and some coastal areas of Greece. Constantine XI was born in this age of restrained optimism on the 8th of February 1404. As the fourth son of his father Manuel and Jelena Dragaš, or else Dijanović. She was the daughter of a magnate ruling the eastern part of Serbian-controlled Macedonia. The couple would have 6 male children in total, most of whom would play a major role in the events to follow. Constantine's early life is not recorded, but what is certain is that during his early years up to 1421, the Ottomans managed to reconsolidate power under the new Sultan, Murad II. The Ottomans thus commenced a new offensive, leading to the unsuccessful siege of Constantinople in 1422, which left the emperor unable to perform his duties due to a stroke, while the mounting pressure on Thessalonica led to its governor Andronikos Palaiologos to sell the city in 1423 to the Republic of Venice to save it temporarily from the Ottoman invasion. The survival of the empire was again at stake. In this new state of affairs, power in Constantinople passed on to the next generation. John Palaiologos would journey to the west like his father once had, in search for help, while Constantine gained his first experience of power ruling as regent in Constantinople with the help of his bedridden father. In 1425, with the death of his father Manuel, John VIII Palaiologos became emperor, and Constantine was trusted with the governorship of the lands from Mesembria up to the Riki, also including Selimvria, one of the most important urban centers left in the crumbling empire. It was a policy of the last Palaiologi to assign the semi-independent administration of their few remaining lands to members of the imperial family. Despite the hopeless situation around the capital, the Morea was in a much better shape. The lands once lost after the Fourth Crusade to the Principality of Achaia had largely been reconquered by the Romans, with the Venetians retaining some coastal areas and the western part of the peninsula being still ruled by the Principality of Achaia under the Zaccaria dynasty, a family of Genoese descent. To the northeast of these domains lay the Duchy of Athens and Thebes, another Latin state ruled by the Acciaioli, a Florentine merchant family that had been maintaining power thanks to their Ottoman vassalage. The presence of the Ottomans was still felt in the region as the energetic governor of Thessaly, Turahan, conducted a raid in the Peloponnese in 1423. Another external force encroaching into the peninsula would be Carlo Toko, the lord of Zakynthos, Kefalonia and Lefkas from 1376, who slowly but steadily managed to gain control over Epirus and eventually came into conflict with the Zaccaria, occupying Glareza. Facing those threats, Constantine joined the campaign under John VIII Palaiologos, his brother and now new emperor, against Carlo Toko in the western Peloponnese with the goal of capturing Glarenza. The campaign culminated in the naval battle of Echinades, the last Byzantine naval victory ever recorded, where a Byzantine force under General Leodaris defeated the Latins, capturing 150 of them and destroying many of their ships. After this defeat, Constantine would marry Carlo's niece, Creusa Toko, renamed to Theodora, and the Romans would receive Glarenza as a dowry. From this position, Constantine was appointed despot of several lands around the Morea, with his brother Theodore remaining the de facto overlord of the region, ruling from Mistras, and Thomas also gaining his own share of territories. In 1427, the three brothers set out to conquer Patras, the last big urban center still under Latin rule. The endeavor led to failure, but in the next year, Constantine would attempt to siege the city again. This time, Constantine and his men were prepared for a long siege starting on the 20th of March 1429, with considerable success as they came to an agreement with a local Latin bishop after 2 months. He would leave the city in search for reinforcements, but if he did not come back in time, the city would surrender. With the bishop not returning for a whole year, Constantine seized the city, and 1 year later the city fort also surrendered. In the meanwhile, tragedy struck Constantine as his wife Theodora Toko died during childbirth in 1429. In 1432, the last remaining holdings of the Duchy of Achaia were handed over to the despots of Morea. However, these successes led to retaliations. First, the former bishop of Patras acquired the assistance of Catalan mercenaries who occupied Glarenza. Constantine managed to bribe them so that they would return to the fort, but later he demolished it so that it could not be reconquered again. Ottomans under Turahan also conducted a raid that led to the destruction of the Hexamilion Wall, an ancient structure guarding the entrance to the Peloponnese in 1431. The wall had been built around 410 AD to prevent barbarian raids into the peninsula, but had fallen into ruins after the reign of Justinian, only to be repaired by Manuel Palaiologos in 1415 in a well-recorded effort. In 1437, Constantine was also called to Constantinople by his brother, Emperor Ioannis VIII Palaiologos. Constantine would be left in charge of the capital, while the emperor and a substantial delegation consisting of scholarly elites like Plithon Gemistos and many church officials from all Orthodox patriarchates would attend the Council of Ferrara, in an effort to unite the Orthodox and Catholic churches in hope of gaining military support from the West. During his tenure as regent, a fragile truce had been established with the Ottomans, with the most important decisions for the empire's future taking place in Ferrara and later Florence, where after 3 whole years a union of churches was proclaimed. This decision would generate great resentment from the population of Constantinople, especially for the lower classes, but the emperor along with Constantine deemed it a necessity if the empire were to survive. It is highly probable that they also regarded the union as a purely political decision. Constantine stayed in Constantinople until 1441, when his second marriage was arranged with Caterina Gattilusio, daughter of Dorino I Gattilusio, the Genoese lord of the island of Lesbos. After traveling to Lesbos for the marriage, he returned to Morea. Nevertheless, he would soon be recalled to the capital as the trouble was again underway. Demetrius Palaiologos, his younger brother, would attempt to besiege Constantinople with the help of the Ottomans. In his attempt to reinforce the city, he was trapped along with his wife on the island of Limnos. The Ottoman fleet would block his journey, and Constantine along with Caterina Gattilusio would stay on the island for several months under constant siege, leading to the death of Constantine's second wife. Despite the personal tragedy, the blockade eventually ended with Venetian help, but by the time Constantine reached Constantinople, Demetrius and the Ottomans had already been repulsed. Thus, Constantine returned to Morea in 1443, where he would finally assume the title of Despot and would set out on the boldest endeavor of his dynasty. Once Constantine assumed power in Mistras, the capital of Morea, along with his brother Thomas, he would immediately start preparations for war. He knew the empire would never manage to survive without offensive actions. The plan would be to first fortify the Morea and then launch a supporting expedition to aid the Crusade of Varna. That was a coalition of Christian powers under Hungarian leadership that had set out to drive back the Ottomans from the Balkan Peninsula, partially thanks to the Orthodox submission at the Council of Ferrara, Florence. The international climate was even more favorable thanks to the actions of George Kastrioti, essentially a Byzantine warlord with disputed Greek, Albanian or Serbian roots, who led his subject Albanians in open confrontation with the Ottomans. In the first part of Constantine's plan, the hexamillion was once again repaired in a grand effort that cost considerable money and manpower, so much that several of the Roman subjects fled to Venetian-controlled areas to avoid taxes. It has to be noted that the region of the Peloponnese essentially consisted of a self-sustaining state where political tensions were present, but the populace was much more dynamic and battle-ready than the Thracian domains still left in the empire. Additionally, Mistras was no longer lacking in intellectual capital to Constantinople. Plithon Gemistos, the most famous philosopher and statesman of the era, had set up an intellectual circle. Essentially an academy on the cliffs of the Taygetos mountain through which emerged many great intellectual personalities of the era, ranging from the future patriarch Gennadios Scholarios to Vissarion of Trebizond, a candidate for the papal throne. Plithon envisioned state reforms that would make the Peloponnese a power base with an organization resembling the politia of Plato, a society in contrast with New Rome, Constantinople, whose power had clearly faded. Possibly under the influence of Plethon, athletic games were organized to bolster the morale of the local youth and ingrain in them the ideals of ancient Greece. Despite these positive signs, the army of Constantine was not a professional one. The population of Peloponnese was usually levied under local magnates without central planning in what resembled a feudal system. Even then, many of the men would be undertrained and ill-equipped for war. Probably the most numerous and effective part of the Roman army would be its Albanian mercenaries, a large number of whom had been established in the area during the previous years, both by the Palaiologi and the Latin rulers, along with Latin mercenaries. Of course, professional Roman troops would exist alongside those forces. Having set up his power base, Constantine Palaiologos set out to campaign against the Ottomans in 1444. His first target would be his immediate neighbor, the Duchy of Athens, vassal to the Ottomans. The Roman forces swiftly captured Athens and Thebes before November of that year, bringing the Dukes of Athens under their vassalage. This was regarded as a monumental feat at the time, with the locals seeing a Greek hero of old times in Constantine. Unfortunately for them, in November of that year, the Christian coalition was defeated at Varna, and thus only the Albanians of Kastriotis would remain as a distraction for the Ottomans. Nevertheless, Constantine pushed forward, as he was now reinforced by 300 Burgundian knights gifted to him by Philip the Good of Burgundy thanks to his success. The force managed to advance up to the Pindus mountains in Thessaly, where the locals proclaimed Constantine their lord. In the meanwhile, an officer of the Roman force, Constantine Katakuzinos, captured the town of Lithoriki, which was renamed to Katakuzinoupolis in his honor. However impressive these successes had been, they could not last. The Ottoman behemoth would come crashing south, led by the Sultan Murad II and Turahan, along with his deposed Athenian duke, and Constantine's force retreated back to the Hexamilion Wall, preparing for a staunch defense. It was estimated during the time that a force of up to 20,000 was mustered under the Despot's orders. But neither the fortifications nor the augmented numbers were enough to stop the Ottoman war machine of 60,000 men, who were also equipped with cannons, and thus, after 2 weeks, managed to break through. The Ottomans thus invaded the Peloponnese, but only raided some areas without proceeding to permanent occupations. Consequently, for the next 4 years, Constantine would be the nominal tributary of the Ottomans. Even though the success of his campaign was short-lived, the strategic rationale behind it was sound. The local population seemed to still support the Palaiologi family and the Roman rule, even after years of absence. But an even more important message was sent to the Turks. Rome would not go down without a fight, even against the Ottoman Goliath. In 1448, John VIII Palaiologos died, leaving the succession to his brother Constantine. Constantine was thus crowned emperor in a modest procession in Mistras in 1449 and swiftly departed for the capital. The new emperor arrived in Constantinople just to find a city irreversibly divided between the Unionists, the ones supporting the church union with the Catholics, and the anti-union opposition. The latter stance had strong support from the common folk. The balance was somewhat kept in place though thanks to Lukas Notaras, a wealthy man and the last Megas Dukes of the empire. In the meanwhile, Constantine would do whatever would be possible to gather allies and funding. Initially, he tried to raise taxes on Venetian goods in order to fill up the state coffers, but the Venetians relocated their markets in Ottoman lands, and thus Constantine made dealings with the Republic of Ragusa. On a diplomatic front, Constantine tried to secure a third marriage with princesses from Trebizond and Georgia, but without any success, up to 1451, with the death of Murad and the ascension of Mehmed II to the Ottoman throne. Even if the new Sultan promised to keep a truce with the Romans, it was by the time evident that the new energetic ruler had eyed up Constantinople and was determined to take the city by force. Constantine had the last ace up his sleeve, however, an Ottoman pretender, Orhan Celebi. The threats of the Romans to release the pretender were unfruitful, and the Ottomans now seemed more determined than ever to deliver the finishing blow. Constantine sent delegations to all major powers of the era that could offer some help: the Pope, Genoa, Venice, Aragon, and Naples, while at the same time tried to repair the Theodosian walls and mustered as large a force as possible to defend the city. The events leading up to the final siege of Constantinople and its eventual fall are well attested and illustrated through a plethora of shows and documentaries, and will thus not be the subject of this video. What has to be mentioned is that the efforts of Constantine Palaiologos allowed for the Byzantines to field 5,000 of their own troops in addition to 2,000, mainly Western, foreigners for a last heroic defense. Ultimately, Constantine, having already sacrificed the 49 years of his life to ensure the survival of the Roman Empire, went down fighting for the defense of the city. He had done everything humanly possible to prevent this catastrophe. Through an era of decline and weakness, Constantine XI Palaiologos had proven a man with an iron will, performing his holy duty as the last ruler of the Romans through a life of hardship, risk, and decisions made to his personal detriment. Constantine was thus something much more than a last emperor. In many regards, he was the embodiment of the Roman spirit, dying alongside the empire. But despite his apparent failure to rescue Constantinople, his sacrifice paved the way for the survival and eventual uprising of the Romans against their Turkish masters. For 400 years, the Romyi, the Orthodox Greek-speaking people of the Balkans, the spiritual descendants of the last defenders of the Queen of Cities, would rise up in one revolt after the other until eventually they would manage to achieve their long-desired freedom. And it would be the words of the most famous of their leaders, Theodoros Kolokotronis, that proved the sacrifice of the emperor as the most worthy of his deeds. 370 years after Constantine's death, when Kolokotronis was asked by the English to conclude a peace with the Turks, he replied, "Our king, Constantine Palaiologos, never negotiated with the enemy."